Hello and welcome back, everybody. Welcome once again to Kerbal Space Program Fundamentals. So far, we've managed to get a rocket to touch the edge of space. We've taken a slightly larger, slightly more complex rocket, gotten it into orbit, done some orbital operations, and rendezvoused with another craft. I think that puts us right in line with NASA development through Mercury and Gemini and onto Apollo. So today we're going to make our moonshot. So we're going to have a slightly smaller scale and scope than the Apollo missions. The Apollo missions obviously using a separate command vehicle and a lunar landing module and a three-man crew. Maybe we'll do another video like that where we make a sort of Apollo-style rocket. Today, though, we're going to send one guy out there. One guy to the moon in a Mark I landing pod. Not landing pod, one command pod. We've also got the lander cans and stuff. So eventually we can get into some more complex rockets, but for now this is fundamentals, right? So like all of these rockets we've done so far, we need a craft that can carry a Kerbal and get a Kerbal home, right? That's our basic requirement that we got to make sure we can meet. So what do we need for that? We need a parachute. Oops, grab that parachute, put that on there. We need to be able to disconnect the pod from the rest of the craft. We get our stack decoupler. That guy's ready to come home, so that's good. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to build the actual lander. So this is the portion that's going to come down to the surface of the moon. It's going to set down. It's going to allow our Kerbal to EVA out of his vehicle, walk around, play with some moon rocks, put a flag in, beat the Russians, whatever we're doing. It's very important we have a good lander. Some things to keep in mind: this lander is going to have to bring us to the surface, get us down safely. There is no craft to rendezvous with in orbit to get us back to Kerbin, so this craft will also have to get us all the way back to Kerbin, and it's going to have to be nice and stable, so when it does land, it doesn't want to tip over. If we build something really tall and skinny, it might just tip over if we land on a hill, so we want a nice wide base. So what I'm going to go with, we're going to use these T200 fuel tanks. I like them. Stick one of those under there. We're going to get one of these 909 engines, stick that under there. Now over here in our utility section, I'm going to go symmetry, get a very basic photovoltaic cell, stick them on the side there, and a couple of battery packs right underneath those solar panels. So that'll be our return stage. This is the part that's going to lift back off from the moon, get back to Kerbin, come back into the atmosphere, or bring our pod back so it can get back into the atmosphere. We don't need much fuel. There's a little trick for getting home from the moon that actually allows you to use very, very little fuel. So we're going to cover that today as well when we're coming back from this trip. Now I'm going to go to 3x symmetry. I'm going to go to the structural section. I'm going to get this smallest radial decoupler we have. Go to the back of my craft here and just stick that right on. Hold on, pull these batteries off. Why is it? This will happen every now and then. It just misbehaves. It doesn't want to stick to things. Once it sticks once, it'll usually stick again in another location. Why? It's really strange. Let me pull the solar panels off, see if those are causing my problem. I guess those were causing my problem. Okay. You know what? We'll find a better way to put these batteries and solar panels on them. Going back to 2x symmetry. And just kind of see if there's a spot where I could fit these. I guess if I go 3x symmetry, it doesn't mind. So I'll just put that on. Well, then that's going to get in the way of my ladder. Let's pull that off. Put it right there. There we go. I can put my batteries right there. And I'll take my solar panels and put them right there. Still have 2x symmetry on those. I don't really need 3 batteries and 3 solar panels on this portion of the lander. So I don't want to use the 3x symmetry. And we don't want to put anything in the front here because we've got to build more ladder. We've got that very small amount of ladder right under the door. And we need to make it come all the way down so that our Kerbal can get down to the surface very easily. Alright, So now we've got our 3 radial decouplers in place. I'm going to go back to fuel, propulsion, grab some more of these T200 tanks, put those on, more LV909s, and just to make it pretty, I'm going to put these little nose cones on there. You don't have to do that. I think it looked nice. Alright, so we've got the propulsion phase is taken care of. Now we need something to actually land on. Oh, there's my landing struts. Grab some of those. Just stick those on like that. So now we've got landing legs. Now I'm going to go to single, just the dot, turning symmetry mode off. And I'm going to grab this mobility enhancer, this ladder. So this will be a little extending ladder. Put that right about there. And just a couple of lengths of ladder to connect the whole thing together. And we want to be able to deploy this ladder without having to go in here and actually right-click on it while we're flying around. So we're going to learn about a new thing that we haven't done yet, right over here at the action groups. So we click on action groups, pulls up this new menu we haven't messed with yet. Now all of these are sort of predefined. Stage is your space key. Gear is the G button, which will cause your landing legs to deploy, or if you have landing gear, to deploy the landing gear. Lights turns your lights on and off. RCS, that's your reaction control. We haven't really messed with that yet. Maybe the next video. SAS, that's that stabilizer we always use with the T key. Brakes is B, that's for anything with wheels, obviously. And abort is your backspace key. We haven't messed with abort either. Once you get into making a more complex rocket, you may want to have some sort of a fail-safe system in place in case things go horribly wrong. You can slap the backspace key and disconnect your crew from the doomed rocket to save their little Kerbal lives. We're not going to bother with that right now because, you know, they're not real. So, okay, first thing we're going to look at here is custom 1. We got 1 through 10, and those correspond to the numerical keys on the top of your keyboard there. So we're going to use custom number 1. We select that. Then we select this ladder and click toggle ladder. So that adds that to the group action. So from now on, when we hit the 1 key, this ladder will toggle. If it's out already, it'll retract. If it's retracted, it'll deploy. And we're going to go ahead and launch our little lander just to see how the proportions look. See how it fits out there, if it looks right, if we're happy with it. Alright, so there it is on the launch pad. We're not going to launch it. We're going to hit the G key. Hitting it once turns the landing gear off. It's just, you just have to hit the G key once to turn it off, and then you can turn it back on, which will cause the landing gear to deploy. You see it's compressing. We're on Kerbin. Kerbin has very high gravity compared to the moon. And these fuel tanks are all full. These outer fuel tanks will be much closer to empty when we actually land on the moon. So the craft will weigh less, it'll have less mass, and it'll weigh less because it'll be under less gravity. So the fact that those are compressing isn't really an issue. And just to make sure it works, we hit the 1 key. We can see our ladder there deploying. It's going to extend probably through the floor because the legs are compressed, but that's not a big deal. Go ahead and hit the escape key and revert the flight back to the vehicle assembly building. So we know our lander looks pretty good, should hold itself together, should land very nicely. Now what we need to add are some fuel lines, which are under propulsion. On this last page, last item, external fuel duct. Fuel lines are so important. This is where you're getting into onion staging and asparagus staging. We're going to use onion staging today. Asparagus is a little complex, takes a little while to set up, and isn't necessarily needed for a mission that's short range like this. It's not we don't need the extra efficiency we get from that. So we're just going to use this fuel duct to do some onion staging. So the way we'll do that, we're going to zoom in just so we get a good view. And we're going to take this fuel line, we're going to put ourselves in 3x symmetry mode, selecting one of the outer tanks, which will also select all the other outer tanks since we're on that symmetry mode. Click there, and then select the inner fuel tank. Oh, little glitch there, hold on. Try that again. There we go. Okay, So now we're running fuel. We can see the little arrows going to the right here. We're running fuel from these outer tanks to that inner tank. So now what we're going to do is have all of these engines fire at the same time. So if we look down here, we've got 3 and 1. They're separated. I'm just going to grab this one that's by itself, pull it down with the 3. Now they're all going to fire at once. Up here where our staging is a little messed up, it's wanting to detach these outer tanks and detach this lower tank all at the same time. We're going to split that up. So we're going to make a new stage, select the 3 tanks, draw them down here. So what's going to happen now, if we look at this little order of operations, all 4 of our engines will fire at the same time. The inner tank will burn using fuel from these, or the inner engine will burn using fuel from these outer tanks. The outer engines will use those same fuel tanks. So these tanks are going to be running out of fuel while this one stays full. So we'll be approaching the moon, coming down for our landing, only using these external tanks for fuel. When we're all done on the moon and we're ready to leave, we can use the last little bits of fuel in here to get up into space. But before we really make orbit, we can detach these outer tanks, leaving only this central fuel tank and central engine to get us home. And if you remember from the orbital operations we did around Kerbin, it doesn't take that much fuel and that much power to move a very small payload like this little tiny capsule up here. So this should be more than enough to get us home. Far more than enough. We're going to come home with lots of extra gas. So it'll be a very safe mission. So that's our lander. So this is our effective payload. This is what we need to get to the moon. And the way we did that on Earth was by building probably the largest, most complex machine mankind has ever devised out of the Saturn V rocket. In Kerbal Space Program, the moon's kind of small potatoes. We're not going to have to be that complicated. We're going to go to the stacked coupler, put that on the central fuel tank, and we're going to build our rocket underneath here. Now, again, this is just a fundamentals video. I encourage you to mess around and experiment, find your style of building. This is the way I'm going to recommend, though. I like 2 of these T800 fuel tanks. Oops. Just one right on top of the other. And then I'm going to get under control and an inline reaction wheel. And we'll put an engine under that, the T45, which you guys have probably all come to know and love by now. Now what we've done here is we've got this long spacecraft with a reaction wheel down here and a reaction wheel up here in the capsule. So if I make any sort of attempt to maneuver this craft, these 2 reaction wheels can work in concert to turn the craft end over end, to bend it from both sides, or to exert force on it from both sides. So much more effective. It does use more power, but we've got more batteries, we've got some solar panels. In fact, let's go ahead and add some more solar panels. We'll click on that. To these external tanks, just so we've got another place we can gather a little solar energy if we need to. So what we're looking at here is just a central stack. We're going to put some other rockets on the outside, like we've been doing. We're going to go to 6-way symmetry mode, get that small radial decoupler again, and just snap that on down here in the lower section. 2 more of these T800 fuel tanks. Just stacked on top of each other. And again, I like to keep things tidy. I'm going to put some nose cones on top. Oops. There we go. My mouse is double clicking. I think my mouse has just about had it. Time to get a new mouse. And under these T30 engines, we don't need any steering out of these. We just need them to push our central engine. The T45 is going to do all of our steering for us. Now we're going to set up these to be onion staged the same way we did our lander. So we're going to go to our fuel tank. We still have our symmetry mode on. But now it's a little tighter, so we're going to zoom in nice and tight. We want the bottom engines, or bottom fuel tanks. Select one, select the internal fuel tank, and we are ducting fuel inwards. So we will use all of the fuel in these external tanks before we use any of the fuel in the central tank. Now we need to look at our staging and make sure this is going to work correctly, right? Obviously, we've got our central engine and our external engines separated, so let's fix that, drag that down. So our order of operations for this rocket in total: all the engines fire. Once these external tanks are empty of fuel, we discard them here. That will leave this central engine burning on its own, which should give us enough fuel to circularize and begin our insertion towards the moon. Once that runs out of fuel, we'll hit the spacebar again. That's going to detach here and ignite all of these engines since they're in the same stage. That will carry us the rest of the way to the moon, I think. I haven't done any of the math on this yet, but I think that's where we'll end up, is these 4 engines will be taking us all the way to the moon, slowing us down, getting orbit, landing, getting us back up, and sending us home. Which seems like a lot to ask from these little tiny fuel tanks, but we don't have an atmosphere to fight against, much less gravity on the moon, no gravity on the to fight against, really, as we travel back and forth, doing those little orbital operations. So shouldn't be trouble for this. We should have more than enough fuel. So we end up with a nice small rocket, pretty tidy little guy, that should get this job done. So now we just need to give it a name. I encourage all of you to be creative and think up great names for your moon program. This is going to be the Moonshot 1. And what about a crew? Let's see, Jeb? Yeah, Jeb should probably be the first Kerbal on the moon. We're going to go ahead and leave him in there. You can also experiment by going to the astronaut complex, seeing if there's another Kerbal out there that just captured your heart and your imagination. You really want to send him to the moon, you can go ahead and do that. I'm just going to leave Jeb in there. And off to the launch pad we go. Very exciting. Going to the moon, guys. Going to the moon. Oh my god. I probably owned Kerbal Space Program for 4 months, 6 months before I ever got to the moon, and it was in the ugliest orbit. Oh my gosh. And I didn't even land, I just crashed. Launch! But that's not going to happen to us today. Today we're going to have a successful landing. Landings are difficult. As you'll see when we get a little closer, there's a lot going on. But if you keep it simple, you focus on the things that actually matter, and you try not to complicate matters any more than they already are, you can make it fairly simple. You can make it a reliable thing that you can land every time without needing something like MechJeb or whatever. Once you start getting into precise landings where you're going to set down at a particular location, kind of join up with some crew you've left on the moon in a previous mission, something fun like that, you may, need a little help from MechJeb to kind of get the hang of that. That's fine. I used MechJeb to learn a lot of this stuff. I definitely don't look down my nose at anybody who would use something like that. I did not turn on the stabilizer. Look at that. We were totally drifting off course there. Everybody makes mistakes. But yeah, so I do think we should have some successful landings today, though. It should not be difficult. You guys are going to get out there, start putting Kerbin boots into Mooner soil. Performing our gravity turn at 10,000. Get us bent over at 45 there. We're going to start running out of fuel in these external tanks, but as you can see, if I click on these internal ones, they're still full of fuel. I'm going to go to the map, pull up my nav ball. Got you in my sights, Moon. I'm going to come get you. I'm raising that periapsis up, getting up out of the atmosphere. Alright, we're just about out of fuel in these external tanks. Just let those burn off. Detach them. We're above 30, so I'm going to turn a little farther. I don't like the way bend over sounds. It's dirty. Oh, we have more than enough altitude. I could have stopped burning a little while ago. And now we'll just drift upwards. I don't want to be too far away from the planet. The farther away we are, the slower we are traveling. Just a little trick of orbital operations, orbital mechanics. The farther you are away from a body, the slower you travel to orbit that body. The faster you're moving, though, the more efficient rocket motors become. So if I want to get the most bang for my buck out of these rocket motors, I want this altitude above Kerbin to be closer to 70 than something like 100. As I'm getting further and further away, I have to push harder and harder and harder to get the same amount of sort of punch and push from my motors to get me out to the moon. So here we're just doing another circularization. If you guys watched last week and you've been practicing, you've probably done 100 of these now. You're bored of circularization, so, you know, sorry. I gotta do it, though. I gotta get a circle around this planet if we're gonna get to the moon. Having a nice, even circle is very advantageous when you start doing some sort of operation that's going to send you to another body whenever you're transferring away. Especially if it's something that's orbiting, so like the way that the moon is orbiting Kerbin. If I'm moving a maneuver node around, trying to predict the most efficient path to the moon, having one altitude all the way around, or relatively one altitude all the way around, is going to make it much easier for me to kind of predict where I need to be performing that burn. I'm going to be messing with the maneuver node a lot less. It's going to really simplify things for me. So here a circle is fairly important. It comes down more to convenience than anything. And I've killed my motor. I'm just going to drift up to my apoapsis again and finish this circularization burn. Whoosh. I'm going to push that out just a little over 70. Yeah, 80, 83. Close enough for me. And there we are. We're in orbit. We've got, what, a third, maybe a little over a quarter, a little more than a third, a little less than a third of the fuel that we had in this stage is still available to us. I guess it's about a quarter. So we're going to be able to use this engine and this fuel tank to begin our transit towards the moon. But we got lots of fuel in this upper stage here. So when this runs out, we'll be able to switch over to this upper half and get ourselves the rest of the way there. And so have plenty of fuel for our landing, our return home, no problem. Now, if anybody played KSP way back before you could create these maneuver nodes and before you had, the patched conics and all these other nice tools, the way you got to the moon was to travel around the planet until right there where you had like moonrise, and then you'd perform a burn towards the moon, and that would get you to the moon. If you think about that, though, it gives you a nice starting point for where you should start putting your maneuver node. So we know it's going to be right around here somewhere is our most optimal rendezvous at the moon. As we perform a prograde burn, we're going to extend the apoapsis out on our orbit. So we have this very elliptical orbit that stretches all the way out to the moon. We're traveling, the moon is traveling, we're rendezvousing with the moon. We can't just aim at the moon and try to get there, because when we get there, it won't be there anymore, right? So this is telling us, with this little kind of shadow circle here, where the moon will be when we get to it. And we'll have a periapsis of over 1,000,000 meters. It's really far away, and like I said before, the closer you are, the faster you're moving, the more efficient your rockets are. So we want to get really close, but not run into this thing. So we're going to give it a little more gas, see what that does. Whoa, lost our encounter. So that's no good. Let's start moving this thing around. That's much more successful. All this kind of experimentation and messing around with your maneuver nodes, planning your maneuvers ahead of time, that's what saves you lots of fuel, lots of headache, much more predictable route. So that's got us at 395 kilometers. Let's give it a little more gas. 323. 139. What if I move it? 143, that's a little worse. 167, that's a little worse. Let's get it back in that sweet spot there. 139. Oh, now the periapsis has disappeared. That means we're going to run into the moon. If you want to run into the moon, do this burn, and you can leave. You can walk away. The mission will carry on, and you will run into the moon. I don't want to run on the moon. I want to land on the moon. So I want to get close. I'm going to slow down, pull on the prograde tab a little bit. That's 7,000 meters, 7 kilometers. That's a little close. Let's pull back just a little more. 30. I can make adjustments from there. So, okay. That's our lunar encounter. We'll get within 30 kilometers. That maneuver is coming up in 3 minutes. we're going to burn for 54 seconds. However, I don't think we have the fuel to burn for 54 seconds. So what we're going to do is get in a line with our little maneuver node there. Go ahead and line up with it. And we're going to start our burn just a little bit early. That way, if we have to disconnect and use the rest of our rockets to finish this burnout, we'll have the time to make those adjustments without having to like frantically start slapping at the keyboard and losing our minds. So I'm going to fast forward here until we're at about... Oh, well, I said we would be early, but I guess we're not. I fast forward a little too far. But it's okay, because I'm still not going to freak out, right? It's space. There's lots of room for small errors with a simple little maneuver like this. We can handle it. So there we are, burning at full power. We want to burn at full throttle whenever we're performing one of these maneuvers. Trying to keep our noses pointed right into that maneuver node. And as soon as we run out of fuel, I'm just going to hit the space bar, which should ignite my next set of engines and allow me to carry on in this maneuver. Actually, it might go a little faster since we have less weight to push and more engines doing the pushing. So we should be running out now. Boom! Yep, I think that is actually pushing a little harder. Okay, so that's pretty close. Let's go back to the map view and finish the burnout there. See, we're getting closer and closer and closer. Now, I'm actually going to just turn off my maneuver node. I like to finish my maneuvers out manually just to get exactly what I want. I'm going to give it as little thrust as I can give it. And I just want to take this 47 down to something closer to like 10. Yep, see, I gave it too much gas. Now we're going to run into the moon. All we need to do there is counteract what we just previously did by turning our spacecraft around. Right, just doing a 180 here. You can see we barely used any fuel doing that burn because these are efficient little engines pushing a very light craft. And I'm just going to give it a little tiny push. Boop, little tiny push there. That gets us at 11. 11,000. That sounds great. 11 kilometers from the surface. We're going to whiz by. We're going to be able to see detail on the surface as we go overhead. We're going to be getting a huge boost in efficiency because of how fast we're going to be going when we zip around there. And we're going to be able to slow ourselves down on this approach and get a nice clean orbit around the moon and start planning for our actual landing site. So this is going quite well. Alright, so we're just going to fast forward time as we leave Kerbin behind. Bye, Kerbin. We hope nothing bad happens to it while we're gone, because that's where we keep all of our stuff. Alright. Traveling out here. We're approaching. The moon is approaching. We're going to have our little rendezvous out here. And we need to be mindful of how much time acceleration we're using here, because we don't want to miss our periapsis on the moon. So slow it down right about there and start preparing for this maneuver. You see, we're already here. We're above the moon. Wasn't that easy? We're going to get right on the retrograde marker, go back to the map, and just wait for ourselves to get to periapsis. Getting closer, getting closer. Alright, we're there. Right on the retrograde marker, full throttle. Performing a nice burn. Pulls that down, that apoapsis we just created. Yeah, 43 is fine. So now we've got this low orbit right around the moon. We've got this side over here is lit by the sun. That's obviously where we want to land, right? We don't want to land in the darkness. Later on, you can do night landings. They're a lot of fun. I'd recommend having some lights on board. Our craft is much simpler than that. We don't have any lights. So if we come down on the night side, we're doing it, you know, by luck. And radar altimeter. But it's not just light and darkness we need to keep in mind here. There's also the surface, right? We've got these huge craters. We've got some smaller craters, some smaller craters, and some smaller craters, some little bitty baby craters, right? It gets smaller and smaller. The entire surface is pockmarked with craters and creates sort of a rolling hillside, kind of undulating surface. a little slope is not going to kill us. We've designed a craft that it has a nice wide base. In fact, we can go ahead and deploy our landing gear with the G key now, and you can see how wide that base is. So we would have to be on a pretty steep slope to tip this thing over. So as long as we get something relatively flat, relatively even, we should be able to get our craft down on it and land without too much trouble. So let's see, looking around here, we're going to travel over this path. I'm going to fast forward and get us to about here so we can let the moon rotate just a little bit and figure out exactly where we'll be available for us. When you're playing this in career mode, another thing to keep in mind, all of these are biomes. There are biomes all over the moon, as I expect they're going to add over the rest of the planets. Certain craters are their own biome. Certain sort of exciting features like these big canyons and the poles, the north and south poles, are their own biomes. So either do a lot of exploring or get yourself a biome map of the moon if you're planning on doing a lot of science on the moon. I can unlock a lot of the tech tree just by messing around on the moon, if not most of it, between the moon and Minmus. So okay, we're going to probably put her down somewhere in this area. We're not going to be super picky about where. This should all be pretty flat, pretty even. So I'm spinning the spacecraft around to get to our retrograde marker, because we need to slow down a little bit more again. And we've already done our deceleration burn to get orbit, and you see again, we've not really used much of that fuel. Very efficient little engines. And we're just going to do another nice soft burn here, which takes our path and has it kind of careening directly into this moon. Because, hey, that's what a landing is, right? It's just a crash that's sort of under control. And now we'll fast forward time. I want to get our altitude down to something more like 10,000 for our final deceleration. We don't want to start slowing down too high up, because if we still have a long way to fall and we spend a lot of fuel slowing ourselves down, we'll just speed up again. So this is kind of a beginner's landing, so we are going to do it a little earlier than I normally would, but just to give you a little cushion, a little room to kind of figure things out. But we're also carrying extra fuel. We've got a nice sturdy lander. If you're in a different kind of situation where you're landing on a real budget, you've gotten somewhere and you just don't know if you have the gas to land, the closer you are when you start decelerating, generally the more efficient you're going to be. A lot of times people refer to it as a suicide burn, where you just don't decelerate at all until you're just about to crash into the surface. Then you perform a full thrust burn and stop just before you hit the ground. That's like the most efficient way to decelerate. It's also terrifying. I've only managed to pull it off a couple of times. I've lost far more spacecraft that way than I've saved. So, but it is an exciting option. So okay, we're going to get on our retrograde marker and we're going to start burning. Now, right now, I think you want to make sure you've got surface selected and not orbital, because we need our surface speed, our speed relative to the surface, and we're trying to kill our horizontal speed right now. We're coming down pretty slowly, but we're moving sideways very quickly. And if we come in contact with the surface while moving sideways very quickly, we're going to do cartwheels of death and be ripped to shreds. So that slowed us down quite a bit. Our surface relative speed is only about 50 meters a second. And you can see that the retrograde marker is drifting up into the blue here. So if we match that, our craft will kind of tell us the story of the way we're falling. We're traveling in this direction now. So we're on a much steeper descent, so we've killed a lot of our horizontal velocity, and we're just going to let ourselves drift down a little ways. We can go here to the map and get another view of that. It's predicting we're going to come down right into that crater, which should be kind of fun. Unless we land... Oh no, we're going to land on the rim. We're going to land on the rim, aren't we? Let's change our course. We're going to point the opposite direction, perform a burn, until we see our prograde marker appear down here. Do you see that? So what that means, we're actually traveling in this direction now. We've just changed our direction. Again, if I put us on the retrograde marker, you'll see we're now going this way. Didn't take much fuel to do that. just adjusted our path a little bit, so we're no longer going to land on the lip of a crater and maybe do cartwheels down into the belly of the beast there. We're going to come down in this nice flat plane in between these two craters. Give it a little more gas. And that's all you're doing now, is just kind of finessing it, just getting the hang of give it a little gas here, give it a little gas there, and we want to get this retrograde marker right there, centered on the top of the blue section of our nav ball there. And then we can just line ourselves up with that and start controlling our descent. Now, if we had selected orbit by mistake, you see how it's over here? That's not taking the spin of the planet into consideration. So if you're on orbit instead of surface while you're trying to figure out how to land, you will be moving as you come in contact with the surface of the planet. You will damage your spacecraft. So surface, very important. And we're just slowing down. Want to be under 10 meters a second, probably closer to 5. Not the most efficient way to get to the ground here, but like I said, we got lots of fuel. We don't have to worry about that. We built a very robust little craft. I'm just giving it a little gas at a time with the shift key, and then I'm hitting the X key to kill the throttle. Oh, see that? I started to pop back upwards. And we've touched down. I'll turn off the stabilizer. We don't need it. We're on the surface. Just burn extra electricity. And there we are. We hit the 1 key. Get our ladder to deploy. I told you the legs would be longer on the moon. And there's our ladder. We're on the moon. First try, right? Hit the EVA button to get Jeb out. He can climb down the ladder. And then we'll just hold down shift to hit the space bar to kind of jump off. More dramatic. Yay! And look how high he jumps, right? You're on the moon, you get lower gravity, so everything he can do on the surface of Kerbin, he can do here. He can't really run. She can run on Kerbin, but it'll be more exaggerated. So his walk is more exaggerated. His jumps are obviously much more exaggerated. And our little RCS backpacks that we use to get around in space, we can use here like a little jetpack. You can fly around. I've built a lot of my moon landers, especially early ones in career before I've unlocked a lot of these ladder components, without ladders, because you can just sort of hop up, use your RCS pack to navigate yourself back up to your spacecraft, or get stuck in it like this. Whoops. Alright. So let's plant a flag. That's what we came here to do, right? If we're playing career mode, we'd probably be wanting to, take surface samples and do EVA reports, but we're just here to plant flags. Zoop! Cool little flag pops out. Alright, so there's a nice little flag on the surface, and we can go back to our spacecraft. You probably going to want to spend more time playing around the moon, enjoying your victory. That's fine. I'm just here to show you how to get there and back, so I'll go ahead and retract the ladder. I don't need that down. I don't really need it up either, but I like it tidy. And we're going to dump these external tanks. So I'm going to get us moving towards orbit, and before I circularize, I'm going to dump these tanks so that they fall back to the moon and crash and get destroyed, and don't leave me with a bunch of extra space debris floating around orbiting things to potentially cause trouble in the future, even though, oh my god, what are the risks of hitting one? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my stabilizer back on, and we're going to be mindful of where the 90 is. I've landed with it on the right, the way it normally is when you're on Kerbin. If you've had to do any other maneuvers, yours may have moved around. So just check your nav ball, find the 90. Even if you're not landing directly on the equator of the moon, you can still kind of aim for 90 to begin your ascent, just to keep things simple. Now, Our engines are already on, so we're not going to be hitting spacebar. We're just going to be using the shift key to throttle up. We're just going to throttle all the way up and immediately tip over that 45 degrees because there's no atmosphere to get through here, so we can start circularizing right away. Here we go. Just tipping right over, and if we look at that, so fast, right? We're already up to 12,000. I'm going to go all the way to horizontal here, so I'm all the way bent over, tipped over, and start stretching that orbit out into a circle. That's already a pretty big stretch, and these have very little fuel in them, so I'm just going to dump them. So those are gone, and I can continue to speed up here on my path to orbit. And we've got a nice high apoapsis here at 23 kilometers. Again, no atmosphere to slow us down here, nothing to get in our way, so we can just glide right up without having to lose any altitude. Very easy. Once you start playing around on these planets that have no atmosphere, you see just how much of an effect Kerbin's high gravity and Kerbin's thick, soupy atmosphere really has on your rockets. Alright, 21, 24, close enough for government work. We are in orbit. And look at how much fuel. We have like the whole fuel tank left, right? But we got to get all the way over there. We got to get all the way back to Kerbin from the moon. So how do we do that? Now, this is where it's important to start thinking about all of these objects in a kind of equal way, right? We think of spacecraft and we think of moons and satellites and things like that as different things, but they're all obeying the same laws of physics. So if I'm trying to get back to Kerbin and I'm over here by the moon, how would I do that? Now, when I first started doing this, I would go over here to the far side of the moon and perform a burn to like stretch my orbit back towards Kerbin, thinking I could go that way. But if we add a maneuver node and try to perform that maneuver, this is what we end up with. This is crazy. Why would that happen, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But what we're doing when we perform a burn there, we're traveling in this direction. We're going to the right on the screen here. So we're speeding up relative to Kerbin and relative to the moon. So we escape the moon's gravity, but we are trapped in Kerbin's gravity at a much higher altitude because we're going so fast that it is able to sling us out all the way out here nearly to Minmus's orbit. Oh, excuse me, a little coughing fit there. So what can we do to avoid this fate of being lost in space, spinning around forever in this highly elevated orbit? Well, we can start thinking in the same way we would think if we weren't orbiting a moon up here. What if we were just orbiting by ourselves this high above Kerbin? How would we get home? We'd burn in this direction, right, to our left. We'd slow down, which would bring us back to Kerbin. So the way we're going to do that around the moon is by performing a burn right about here. So I'm going to go ahead and put a maneuver node down and start extending it. Now this already looks wrong, right? We're going away from Kerbin. What are we thinking? But if we keep going, we see that what's going to happen is we're speeding up relative to the moon. We're traveling away from it, so we're speeding up, we're escaping the moon, but at the same time, we're slowing down relative to Kerbin. So we're going to get closer to it. And the more gas we give it, the more we slow down, the closer we get. Then we can start adjusting this to try to find the sort of sweet spot, which looks like it's right about there, sort of just on the sunrise side. And then just give it a little more gas. We just want to get into the atmosphere enough that it slows us down and we get captured by our wonderful home planet of Kerbin. A little more. Okay, 29 kilometers should be perfect. Spin the craft to get it onto the maneuver node, and we've got 27 minutes to kill as we orbit around the moon. We get this beautiful view. It really is pretty out here. this is a small team that makes this game, you know, and they're using Unity, which is like, I guess, mostly open source stuff. They don't have a ton of resources. I mean, there's plenty of people are buying it, plenty of people have contributed, and I understand that the company that's developing this, Squad, actually has business outside of video game development, which, you know, they're fairly new at. So they have some resources, but nothing like an EA or you know, one of these larger game development companies, and they really have created something that's special, and that's very, very special. It's not only can you learn a ton from it, but you are actually genuinely having fun while doing so. And it's just beautiful. I mean, you're looking down on the moon from here as we orbit around. We're going to perform our burn now. And seeing, you know, the sun and Kerbin in the distance as we perform this burn, it's just really awe-inspiring. Gives you a real appreciation for the actual space programs here on Earth, the different scientific endeavors we've undertaken as mankind. It's alright, we got 33 kilometers. I'm going to just get that down. About 30. That ought to be good. That's the thickest part of the atmosphere. Okay, so now we are drifting away from the moon. I can time accelerate safely now. Bye-bye, moon. We hardly knew ye. We'll be back, don't worry. Got lots more exploring to do on the moon. Time accelerate a little more. We've been in this flight for over a day now, and 1 day and 3 hours he's been flying around. And we're just heading back to Kerbin. Alright, now we're in the atmosphere. I think you guys know what happens next, right? We hit the atmosphere, it slows us down, we splash down in the ocean, crew gets recovered, everybody's happy. So, I'm going to move through that fairly quickly. I'm just going to ditch this stage, don't need that anymore. Get myself sort of pointed retrograde because it looks more appropriate. And time accelerate. Let's get the light show here because we're moving much faster than we were moving when we were just in a regular orbit. So we get a little more of a light show. We get a little more of a fire effect around the spacecraft as it... I mean, we're just barely getting into the atmosphere, the thick part of the atmosphere, and we've already got quite a lot of flames shooting off of this thing. You can see we get sort of little extra bit of detail around the solar panels and the ladder rungs. Nice little touches. So that takes you from the surface of the planet up to the moon. I would consider that the primary achievement Kerbal Space Program. You can get yourself to the moon, you can do just about anything. Up until they added persistence and space stations. So space stations are kind of another beast. I was thinking that this little series was just going to end once we'd set foot on the moon and learned to come home. But got a request to do space stations, so that'll be our next video. We'll try to get a video up where we're going to put a couple of pieces up into orbit, get them assembled, get them docked together, maybe create a little crew delivery vehicle or something, get some guys up there into the space station so that they can start utilizing it. There's lots of space station pieces out there, and I am very open to suggestions. So if there's anything else outside of space stations or landing on the moon that you're interested in, that you'd like to see a video on, a video explaining, leave a comment, send me a message. Happy to help. I will be out of town soon though, so it might take me a little while to get back to you, but I promise I'll read it. I promise I'll read everything. Alright, here we come. We're going to land in this nice big bay here. Perfect. That'll make it really easy for the Kerbin Navy to come and pick us up. I'm a little congested. Kind of mispronouncing everything today. Here he comes. And there we go. Jebediah Kerman. First Kerbal to set foot on the surface of a planet outside of the one they were born on. What a hero. Just get him in the water. Just get him in the water and make sure he lives. Wouldn't that be terrible? Do this whole video, get everything up there, land on the surface of the moon, walk around, jetpack. Oh, that was great, right? Crash in the freaking ocean. Genius. And he's safe! And that wraps all that up. So, if you have any other questions, any other suggestions, anything else you'd like to see, anything you've always wanted to know how to do but you don't quite know how to do, send me a message. Put a comment in this video. Let me know, because I'm happy to do it. Everybody have a nice day.